Hello, and welcome to Brand New Me Journey, the series that really talks about the very different stages that we go through on our journey of becoming our best self and being brand new. I am your host, Shate Thompson, licensed mental health counselor, Florida Supreme Court certified family mediator, and your breakup restoration expert. And I'm super excited to have Shane Birkel here with us today. Shane, how are you?
Hey, Shate, good. How are you?
I am doing awesome. I'm so excited to have you here with us today. I know that I was a guest on your podcast, I think
Yes.
last year. Time flies, huh?
Yeah, a few months at least. Yeah. Yeah. I'm so
Yeah.
excited to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm so glad that you are here for us to really dive into talking about relationships and boundaries and just how to grow and be our best self and ways to do so in a healthy manner, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So a little bit about Shane before we dive into this conversation. Shane is a licensed, an LMFT and a relational life therapist and the host of Couples Therapist Couch, the podcast that's all about the practice of couples therapy. Shane works with couples and relationships in his private practice near Boston. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, I love talking about relationships. I don't know if you want me to just dive in to some of the topics we're going to talk about today. But
Well, I want to start with the question first,
yeah,
and
sounds
then
good.
we'll be able to get right to it. So my first question for you today is, what should be considered when creating boundaries for self and in relationships when it comes to family, friends, and romantic relationships? What needs to be considered?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that boundaries are so important for people. And I think that we have we have expectations growing up in our families
Mm-hmm.
that we bring into our relationships that might not be the same expectations that our partner has. And
Right.
I think that it becomes very difficult to communicate, what works for me, and be able to listen to what works for you as my
Right.
partner, because we get into these little tiffs about who's more right or whose
Mm-hmm.
reality is more true. And I think that it can be very damaging, and so for example, like, if my wife grew up in a family where it was very much criticized if you left a wet towel on the floor.
Mm.
And so she learned from a very young age, good people hang their towel up when they're done using it.
Yeah.
And she gets into a relationship with me, and my family might not have cared about that kind of thing.
Right.
And it can be, so the first time I leave my wet towel on the floor, it could be very easy for her to become critical and blaming and say, what's wrong with you? And to start questioning, who am I in a relationship with?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would say is having poor boundaries, is this feeling that I am personally affected by what my partner's doing.
Okay.
And and then if she says something about it, then if I don't have good boundaries, then I'm going to start getting defensive and
Mm-hmm.
saying, well, I don't like the way you're talking to me, or start
Mm-hmm.
explaining myself or dismiss her reality. And it becomes really messy. And so for me to have good boundaries would be for me to be able to hear what's important to her and to
Mm-hmm.
be in her reality and be understanding about that,
Mm-hmm.
and not get into like who's right or wrong, but about, well, hey, it's really important to her that we hang the wet towel up when I'm done with it. And either I can do that for her or I can suggest another compromise or something like that. But having those really good boundaries allows me to stay in that conversation in a
Yeah.
healthy way. And it's so important that each of us are speaking from the first person, and that each of us are being clear about
Mm-hmm.
what we want. And I can go into more detail about that, but that's some of the basics of the boundaries.
So I hear everything you're saying. I agree wholeheartedly with you. But then what comes to my mind now is everything that you're explaining sounds like great communication. right? Like when we have effective communication skills, that we're able to be clear, that we're able to not take things personal per se, but actually hear with our hearts, make sense of what the person is saying, and then from there address that situation. So
Mhm.
what's the difference between that now and boundaries? Like, what's the definition of boundaries?
Yeah, well, it is all about communication for sure. And I think that when we're talking about boundaries, we're talking about ways that we feel less than as a human
Mm-hmm.
being. That the more that I feel confident in myself,
Mm-hmm.
the more that I have a true self-esteem, or as some people say, like love for yourself, or compassion for yourself, or understanding
Mm-hmm.
and acceptance, the more that I can have good boundaries.
Okay.
And so, and that we learn growing up in our families, we learn from society, we learn from schools, we learn from peer groups. We're socialized very differently as men and women.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I think women are more likely to have other-based esteem. I feel good about myself as long as someone else is giving me positive
Mm-hmm.
validation about myself.
Mm-hmm.
I think men are more likely to have performance-based esteem. I feel good about myself if I'm making enough money, if I'm providing for my family, if I'm performing well
Mm-hmm.
in the world, if I can run faster than the other guy.
Right.
Um, that and so what happens is that our self-esteem becomes based on these external things, which is a
Right.
dangerous thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that and I was going to mention, I heard, and I don't know what the exact study was, but
Mm-hmm.
if you ask a 9-year-old girl what kind of pizza she wants, she'll tell you what kind of pizza she wants. She'll tell you
Okay.
her opinion. If you ask an 11-year-old girl what kind she wants, she'll say, I don't really know. I'm not sure. If you ask a 13-year-old girl what kind of pizza she wants, she'll say, I don't know. What kind of pizza do you want? And
Mm.
so women, it's a socialization process
Yes.
that women lose their voice,
Mm.
and they begin to not have their own sense of self in the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't know how. This is a generalization, but oftentimes they don't bring their voice into their relationship in a healthy way.
Right.
And men play into that. They play it, men have a really hard time hearing their partner's voice. They
Mm.
often are very minimizing or dismissive
Defensive.
or
Mm-hmm.
defensive. And so it can be very difficult. And each person usually plays their role in this. It makes it very
Definitely.
hard. And so when I talk about boundaries, I'm talking also about this developing my own self-esteem. So if my wife walks in, she wouldn't really do this, but if she walked in and said, "You're such a jerk, you never take the trash out,"
Mm-hmm.
um, I if I focus on what she's saying, I might feel like, oh, I need to prove myself to her.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean I never take the trash out? I took it out last week. What are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm focusing on the work. First of all, she didn't do a really good job bringing it into the conversation.
Right.
And I'm going to have a hard time staying in that conversation if I'm
Right.
feeling attacked. Or if I'm really bad at these skills for myself, she could walk in and say, "Honey, did you take the trash out today?" And I could get defensive. I could say, "Don't you know how much I've had going on today? Don't you know how hard I've been working? Blah, 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 blah."
Mm-hmm.
And so the better we can get at these skills, and I'll talk more about what this would look like.
Okay.
It is about the communication, but I love thinking about it like I'm going to have really good boundaries, and the ability to be receptive to my partner's experience, and
Mm-hmm.
the ability to then express what's going on for me
Yeah.
in the situation. Yeah.
I was having a really interesting conversation with a girlfriend of mine this past weekend, actually. And we were talking about our children, but then we started talking about self-confidence, right? And how does one develop high self-confidence? Like, where does it come from? How does it come about? So we were like brainstorming for a bit. And it was truly an interesting conversation, to where she was like, well, I believe that my self-confidence came from me playing sports, you know? And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And as I continue thinking, I'm like, you know what? It really comes from experiences that we are able to see for ourselves that we are doing well, or that we can take pride in something that we can look in the mirror, we can recognize ourselves. So we're accepting ourselves more for who we are, and then it builds self-confidence. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a lot of truth in that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But what I will say is that it, it could very easily leak into feeling like I need to accomplish certain things in order to feel good about myself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tricky because if you think about children, um, as parents, we do have expectations for them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we do it is good to give them a lot of positive reinforcement if they're
Right.
good at sports or something, or if they're even involved, to just give them a lot of positive reinforcement for the
Mm-hmm.
commitment or the values that we feel like are important. You're committed to your team, you're working hard, you're a good friend to others, all these things. But
Mm-hmm.
that my acceptance of you as a child is not dependent on you doing these things.
Right.
As a parent, I'm doing my best, and I mess up on this all the time, even as a therapist. That I consciously, I think I understand these concepts, but when I'm in the heat of the moment with my 8-year-old or my 6-year-old, I have a really hard time with it sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but um, that I'm doing my best to let them know that they are a wonderful, valuable human being.
Mm-hmm.
And there are expectations, like you can't hit your sister,
Right.
but you're still a good person.
Mm-hmm.
You just made a mistake when you hit your
Yeah.
sister. Let's talk about what that means.
Yes.
Um, so often the communication from parents can feel like, you hit your sister, what's wrong with you?
Mm-hmm.
You're a bad boy.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's where the shaming starts coming in. That's where it
Exactly.
starts feeling like I need to, not hit my sister. That's a bad one. Or, oh, you got a C plus as a grade. What's wrong with you? You're a bad
Mm-hmm.
kid. So
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden
You
the
can do
kids
so
start,
much better than that,
yeah,
and
exactly.
then they
It can
start
come
to
out in really subtle ways,
mm-hmm.
right? Because sure, you can have expectations that a C isn't that great as a parent, but you have to be really careful about how you communicate that to your kids.
Yes, I agree. So
Um,
that really goes right into as adults, right? When we
yeah,
go through breakups, when we go through transitions, we internalize, and we can have that shame because we can start to feel that we are not worth it, or we made a poor choice in who we were with, and we stayed for so long, to where now it just trickles into all of this negativity. But when we can get back to a place, or get to a place of self-acceptance, right? Accepting ourselves for who we are, not putting ourselves down for any of the choices that we've made, but taking the time to learn from them. Then we can sit in our truth of who we are and be our best self moving forward. Um,
absolutely. Yeah, I love the way you said that. And it's so true. It's such a formative time that when we're kids, that
mhm.
our brains are being formed. And whatever we experience through that time frame, we're going to bring into our adulthood, and we're going to bring into our relationships as adults.
Mhm.
If I tell my kid, what's wrong with you? You got to see, you're a bad kid. If that's
Mhm.
the message, and he takes that on, part of what his brain is learning is that I have to do certain things in my life in order to be a good person
Mhm.
and to feel good about myself. And then when he's in a relationship in 20 years from now, and things aren't going well in the relationship, his neural pathways will tell him, I must be doing something wrong. It's my fault. I'm there's something wrong with me as a person.
Mm-hmm.
There's something wrong with my character. No one will ever love me. I'm not able to be loved. And how heavy and terrible does that feel when you think that that's the reality of the situation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when it comes to boundaries now, because then it goes right back to the way that we're able to express ourselves and the way that we're able to show up with others, and not be super defensive. Now I want to get into being walled off,
Yeah,
right?
good.
So can you tell me what is the
Yes.
difference between good boundaries and being walled off?
Great question. Um, and what was I thinking? Oh, because so there are two, I would say, let's think about this as a spectrum.
Okay.
On one end is boundarylessness, having no boundaries at all.
Okay.
On the other end is being walled off. And neither one of those is really healthy.
Right.
And health would be healthy boundaries. That would fall in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
healthy boundaries. And what we find, not all the time, but very often, a boundaryless person will match up with a walled off person. And there are male-female dynamics to that. I'll let you guess which one might be more likely to be boundaryless and which one might be more likely to be walled off.
Mm-hmm.
And men tend to be more walled off. Women tend to be more boundaryless.
Yes.
It doesn't always work that way. It can be flipped. There are a lot of relationships where that's flipped. And obviously that's just if it's a male-female partner, but that, so what happens, people talk about the pursuer-withdrawer dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of plays into that. The boundaryless person would be the pursuer. The walled-off person would be the withdrawer.
So before you get too deep, can you give me an example of a boundaryless person and a walled-off person?
Yeah, so let's say that we're getting into a relationship. We've only been together a year, and a boundaryless person it feels very anxious. The energy feels very anxious. It feels like, are you there for me? It feels like when maybe you go spend time with your friends,
Mm-hmm.
and the boundaryless person is sitting at home, they'll call every 5 minutes, and if the person isn't answering, they'll keep calling every 5 minutes, and then all of a sudden the other person will look at their phone and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I have 12 missed calls from this person.
Mm-hmm.
And the boundaryless person will feel like, I need something from my partner in order to feel okay. I need the reassurance. I need something from them in order to feel okay about myself. Or that it'll be the end of the workday, and both people will come home, and it's that couple hours at the end of the day that they have together. The boundaryless person will be like, let me tell you about my day. Let's talk for 2 hours. Let's, what's going on? And the walled off person might be like, oh my gosh, I just had the hardest day. I just need to zone out in front of the TV and not talk to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And it can create problems in the relationship. Neither one is right or wrong.
Right.
We have a lot of acceptance about each partner's reality, but they're both trying to get what they want at the same time, and it feels like stress and it feels like tension.
Yes.
And it's really important for couples to make a plan in those kinds of situations.
I agree.
But that's the kind of the feeling of the boundaryless partner, and the walled off person might be more like, needs his cave time, needs that he'll feel like, can't we just be satisfied with how things are?
Mm-hmm.
Why do we always have to be pushed? Why do we always have to be pushing for more?
Mm-hmm.
You leave me alone, I'll leave you alone, and we'll be fine.
Right. So I'm hearing that it's less emotion in a walled-off individual, and it's I hate to say super emotional, but it's where for the no boundaries individual, they are less inclined to help me with this one, because I don't want to say super emotional. I think that's the inappropriate way to explain it.
Yeah.
So
Well, there's an anxiety to it. Feels dependent, feels like
okay.
dependent on the other person.
Yes.
That also maybe doesn't sound very positive. But yeah, so neither one is what the strengths that they have are that they're more in touch with their emotions. They want more vulnerability. They want more connection, and it's going to be those are healthy things for the walled off person. And so what they're asking for is usually good. It's usually important for their relationship. They're just doing a bad job of being too needy about it.
So it's not that the walled off person doesn't want to be vulnerable. It's that we need to be able to do it on different terms.
Well, it depends on the person.
Okay.
Sometimes I tell people, you have a walled off partner who doesn't want to do the work, and you have to make a choice. Are you willing to live with that the rest of your life? Or are you going to make another choice for yourself?
Right.
Because we have to accept that.
So education is power either way. And being in the middle of that spectrum that you shared with us in the beginning, is finding a healthy medium for individuals that they're able to communicate their wants, their needs, and interact with each other in a healthy manner.
Yeah, and I will say most of the time, that walled off partner, it does want to do the work. They are interested. They just don't have the skills or the knowledge. They haven't learned how to do it. And it's going to take some education and effort to learn how to be in a healthy relationship.
Definitely.
We have to learn how we play off each other. The more you complain about what I'm not doing for you, the more I'm going to tend to wall myself off.
Right.
The more I wall myself off, the more the other person's going to get anxious. And it's just like a vicious cycle.
Right. Because they're protecting themselves until that they know how to do otherwise. Awesome sauce. All righty. Yeah. So if we are then to talk about intimacy in a relationship, right? Because for both of these individuals, or a point blank period, intimacy is important, right? But intimacy is more than physical. And it really starts with vulnerability, that we're able to be vulnerable with each other. Then intimacy can actually be at its peak, right? So what does one have to do to increase their ability to have intimacy in a relationship?
Okay, so this goes back. Let's keep talking about this from the framework of the boundaries and the self-esteem. If I am going to, if I'm on either side of that spectrum, where I'm walled off or I'm boundaryless, I'm actually avoiding intimacy. It's two different ways of avoiding intimacy.
Right.
And so, if I'm the boundaryless person, it might be more of a wall of words. I'm not actually being vulnerable with you and telling you what's going on for me, because I'm just like pouring it on. And so on either side of it, it takes work on that self-esteem. I mean, that could come in a lot of different forms.
Okay.
I need to, if I need to go to individual therapy for myself, learn how to breathe into myself, a lot of self-talk around I'm enough and I matter. I'm a good person. I have control of my life. I'm not, I am empowered. These kinds of things. And that's going to be really helpful if I have other friends or family in my community, or a community situation that I go to that gives me support. It's going to be, just things like exercise, meditation, those kinds of things can be really helpful. But this feeling that no matter what my partner says or does or thinks about me, I am a strong person. I'm a good person. I can accept if they disagree with me. And I'm confident that that's not about me as a person.
Exactly.
And so that's the energy for both sides that I want to bring into that. That's how we begin to have the ability to have more intimacy.
I love that.
Yeah, something that I guide people a lot when I have couples sitting in my office with me. That this can be really important. If there's something that your listeners might take away from this, like an activity that they could try, that and it can be really difficult, but it's that we're going to sit down and have a conversation, the two of you, about something difficult, something that's been hard to talk about before. And there's only going to be one speaker and one listener. Because what happens is we get confused about what is the agenda, what is the purpose of this conversation.
Right.
So we're going to get really clear about the rules of this conversation. The speaker is the only one who can express their reality.
Okay.
And the listener's job is to take in the speaker's reality. They don't have to fix it. They don't have to change it. They don't have to defend themselves. It's not about them. They just have to be very accepting. They don't have to, they don't have to agree to anything they don't want to agree to. They don't even have to agree to the truth of what the speaker's saying. They just say, what I hear you saying is, what I hear your experience is. And their job is just to really, really thoroughly take in the other person's reality and experience. Now, that's really hard. That's really hard to do. And the speaker can make it easier. Their job is to speak from the first person.
Right. Okay.
To say, this is my experience of what happened. This is the story I tell myself about it. This is what I make up in my head is that you don't care about me. That's what I'm making up in my head. I know that's just my stuff that's going on in my head.
Right.
How I feel about that is really anxious. It's not your fault. I know that's just from growing up in my family. Everybody was anxious, and I know that I get really anxious when you don't text me back. And what I would really appreciate is whatever. So, you say what happened. You say what I make up about that, or the story I tell myself about that, how I feel about that. And you can express requests if you want. And so the other partner, usually it might sound like, I don't know why you're stressed. I don't know why you're feeling alone. We went on a date night last week. Why are you so upset? It's this feeling of like, I'm dismissing your reality. But for this activity, it's really about, wow, I'm hearing that you feel really alone sometimes. I have enough self-esteem for myself that I'm not going to need to be defensive. I'm not assuming I did anything wrong.
Right.
In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I took her on a date night last week. I don't understand why she's feeling alone. But right now, I'm just taking in her reality. I hear that you're feeling really alone in this relationship. Tell me more about that.
I love that.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, the partners, if people do this well, and it takes a lot of practice, but if people start doing this well, that anxiety will just go down so much. They'll start that's all they want. The walled-off partner will often feel like, okay, I'm going to have to spend 3 hours every night just talking about your coworkers, and I'm going to have to, take you on 4 date nights every week, and I'm going to have to do, it's just too much. So I might as well just zone out and not even think about it.
Right.
It's never going to be enough. And so, but what happens is if we don't make it about the things, you don't have to do all these things. It's not about the time. It's not about the date night. It is and it isn't, but it's about your partner wants you to take in their reality. Your partner wants you to understand what their experience is like. And all of a sudden, it's a whole new conversation.
It is.
It's not about each of us fighting for our voice. It's about we can be really understanding, accepting each other, and we feel heard. So there's this relaxed, feeling in the relationship at that point.
Yes, I do that with my couples as well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's so powerful when you can see that shift of how they are now understanding each other a bit more. I like to say we need to hear each other's hearts, right?
Yeah.
And when we take the time to hear each other's hearts and we know each other's intent, we can do a better job of actually hearing each other and being less on the defense, but actually hearing what that they are saying. So it's so funny at times in couples therapy. One person might say something and the next person wants to react to, and I'm like, no, pause. Did you just hear what was said? I need you to repeat that back so we know that you're both hearing each other.
Yes.
So it's super powerful. And when we're able to do that, like I've taught my kids how to communicate in this way. So it's something that we need to be able to use in all the different relationships and interactions that we have so we can truly hear each other. Whoever is our loved ones, our family, our friends, we take the time to hear and be heard. It's amazing when we can actually be heard.
Yeah, that's right on. Totally. That's so great.
Good.
Yeah.
I love that concept. I'm so happy that you brought that aspect in, because when we're able to communicate how we're truly feeling and doing it in the first person, right? Because it's easy to slide into you instead of focusing on I feel this way and it's because XYZ, or when this happens, or even what you said, the story that I tell myself, because so many times it's because of our upbringing. It's because of what we've experienced that we're taking things a certain way. And when we can express that, we'll see that it's possibly completely different than what we're already telling ourselves.
Yeah, totally. I'm thinking about one other thing. I know I could just keep talking forever, so feel free to stop me. But it's so important to so often we miss the point of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that my partner will say, "Hey, we never have date nights." And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, we just did like 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say never. And but I'm missing the whole point of the conversation if I go there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so much more important to understand what is behind that.
Mm-hmm.
What would you feel if we had more date nights?
Mm-hmm.
What would that mean for you? You know, and then it becomes about, well, I would feel like a priority, or I would feel important to you, or I feel like you care about me.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden we're having a conversation that I'm much more, I want to feel like we care about each other more too.
Exactly.
You know, it's not about I failed,
right?
because I'm driven by performance-based esteem. And as soon as you say that you're not happy, I'm going to start thinking how I failed you and defend myself possibly. And so all of a sudden it's not about that anymore, but it's about like, oh, my partner's hurting and she just wants to feel like a priority and feel more cared for. And we can both be on the same page about that. Let's both listen to each other about how we can make each other feel more connection.
True. So true.
Yeah.
Okay, so that makes me think about assertiveness and aggressiveness, right?
Okay.
Because if we want to have healthy communication, and we want to be able to have our voice be heard, but yet there's different parts. It's passive aggressiveness, there's aggressiveness, then there's assertiveness. And when we can actually learn to be assertive, it makes all the difference, right? So share your thoughts with me on how to be more assertive, to have a voice in doing so with love.
Good. And let's be clear. I don't know what it is, 80 to 90% of the time, I believe in a male-female partnership, the woman needs to have more assertiveness and more of a voice.
I agree.
Because this is, again, part of the way that we're socialized. And what happens is that the walled-off man in our example is sort of by default getting everything that he wants.
Right.
If he just comes home, watches TV, and doesn't really make much of an effort, the other person, it's the burden on the other person to bring into the conversation something that needs to be different, which isn't necessarily fair, but it's thousands of years of patriarchy that we're trying to unravel here, and so what happens for women is that it becomes about, oftentimes it can be like complaining or passive aggressive comments or just getting quiet. There's fear around bringing their voice, being assertive in the conversation, speaking clearly about what they want. There's probably also fear if they actually say it and then they don't get it, it's even worse.
Right.
And so that's where it becomes so important. And to use the skills that we were talking about, as far as speaking from the first person, is going to be so helpful to say that, to bring these things into the conversation, to have the confidence to speak your truth with love, because that's the important thing. You have to do it in a loving, respectful way. And again, in this, we're talking about this kind of a male-female thing. I know it doesn't always work this way, but we'll just stick with the example. For the woman to be able to say to the guy, it's not like let's say that he watches football every night, and it drives her crazy. And if she says, "Oh, another football game on tonight, great, I'll just go do something else," or or he's like, "Oh, you can invite friends over too to watch the game," and like he thinks he's fixing the problem.
Right.
He's not actually speaking her voice.
Right.
Like, football time will never feel like we're doing what I want to do.
Right.
And so it could also feel like, I hate how you always watch football. And then the defensive guy is going to say, "Oh, great, I guess I'll never watch football again. Fine." It's not about that.
It's not.
He's happy to have him watch football some of the time. So getting really good at speaking from the first person would sound more like, "Honey, when you watch football every night of the week, it makes me feel like I'm not being seen. I'd really like to make an effort that we could have one night a week where we do something. We turn the TV off, we put our phones away, and we just do something fun together." So that's speaking your truth with love and respect and confidence into the situation. You're not blaming, you're not judging, you're not complaining, but you're saying that there's part of this reality that it's not working for me, and I would be grateful if we could try to do things in a different way.
Okay.
And I'm saying
tone matters.
It's simple. I know it's a lot more complicated than that, but
yeah, but no, I mean, it was a great example, and it helps us to understand that tone matters, right? Our intent, like the way that we share our message, it can be done so in a passive aggressive way where we're not really speaking up for ourselves, or we can do it matter of factly, but with love and care and compassion in it. And when we do that, but yet we are comfortable in our own skin, then it can be where it's assertive and not aggressive. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We could talk a little bit about leverage. I know I don't want to get into it, but just to say a little word about that.
Go ahead.
Let's say you start using these skills, you're doing a really good job, you think that you're doing a really good job with it, and your partner just sits and watches football every night anyway. You haven't figured out how to get enough leverage yet.
Okay.
And we have to figure out where the leverage is. If you are, I hope this isn't happening, but if you're serving him his dinner while he's sitting there, that could be a good leverage point, that all of a sudden you're not serving him his dinner as he's sitting there in front of the TV. And he's like, hey, what's going on? Remember those things I was talking to you about, honey? We still need to have a conversation about that. And I'm not going to be making your dinner for you until we have time to talk about that.
Oh, yikes.
It's loving and respectful, but it's like, I'm not going to pretend like I'm happy. And you're right. The yikes is like, there's a fine line there. You don't want it to be manipulative, but you also need to be able to feel like
respect self.
Yeah, like exactly. You're respecting yourself. I'm not going to be your servant for the next 30 years. We talk about this and figure this out because it's not working for me. And if you're not listening, I'm going to keep figuring out how to make it so that you will listen.
Great point.
You know.
Yeah. So thank you for adding that, because many times we can get lost, right? Because in my relationship risk assessment, I actually asked one of those questions. Are you able to talk about your red flags or your concerns, and are you content with the outcome afterwards? Are you simply talking about it and nothing's happening? Or are you both coming up with ways to move forward in a healthy way that works for your relationship? Because many times we can talk about it, nothing happens, and we stay in this unhealthy relationship and just sit and say, well, I spoke about it, right? But that's not helping anything if movements are not being made on both parts to make the relationship work for both parts.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. That's great. Yeah.
All right. Awesome sauce. So I am huge on growth, right? That is at the heart of everything that I do. It's about growth, right? And growing to a place of self-acceptance. So how does one understand and accept self to contribute to a healthy relationship?
Yeah. And I think, it plays into a lot of this stuff we've been talking about, as far as this idea, we have to break away from this idea that I need this other person in order to survive. This is something, these are neural pathways that were formed when we were 4, 5, 6 years old, that we actually did need our parents to survive. And so I'm going to be really careful to be perfect and not spill my milk and not do anything wrong, so that I don't make my parents stressed and anxious and yell at me. Because if I'm not acknowledging that they are doing anything wrong. As a kid, I just internalize that, and I feel like, what's wrong with me? I'm the one who's messed up. Because and I should just try to make them happy because I need them for survival.
Right.
And so we bring that kind of the same brain activity into our relationships. I know, this might be just one little part of it, but I think it's an important part of what the work that you do is like, we have to break away from this idea that I need to cater to the other person. I need to tiptoe around their emotions. I need to, I'm dependent on what they're doing in order for me to feel okay about myself. So part of that is building that sense of self. And I do think it's really helpful to have those things in place, like a good community or even just a good friendship or other family members. Have things like that going on in your life, but that you're building this sense that I'm confident enough to speak my truth in this relationship. And it's actually going to be healthy for the relationship. It's going to be good for your partner. And it's going, even if it feels stressful at the time, once you start practicing this, it will make the relationship feel so much more healthy overall.
So autonomy really major when it comes to having those healthy relationships, because when we're able to have interactions outside of the relationship, then it can build our sense of confidence and acceptance for ourselves, because we're interacting and we have all these other things happening in our own life outside of the relationship.
Yeah. And I think even using the mindset, thinking through this idea, I do not need my partner. I do not need, now, don't say this to them, but it's just what you're thinking in your head. I do not need my partner. I will be fine. I am a strong person. I have figured out how to survive this long, and I will continue to figure that out. And I will be strong. And because of that, I am not afraid to speak the truth in my relationship. And I'll do it respectfully and I'll do it lovingly, but I'm not going to live the rest of my life in resentment because of what I'm not saying in the relationship. That's not a healthy way for either of us to live.
I agree. And that's a great affirmation that all of the listeners should definitely write down and repeat on a regular basis for themselves so it can get ingrained in their brain and in their being. So we all move forward and interact in such a way that we know who we are, and we're not stuck on what everyone else believes about us and does for us, that we don't speak up for ourselves.
Yeah, and if there are any listeners who are listening right now and saying, well, that's great for some people, but I'm not that strong, I want you to know it's not true. You are that strong, no matter who you are, because you are human, because you've made it this far. You are that strong, 100%. You can do this.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah.
So a question I love to ask everyone that comes on, what's one of the most important things that you have learned on your journey?
I think for me in my own personal relationships, because I've done a lot of training as a therapist, but I look at it like I'm learning how to be better in my own personal relationships in my life. The more that I do that, the more I can help other people. And to answer the question, one of the most important things for me has been patience. Because when I'm in a situation, whether it's with my wife or or whoever else, and something happens, I feel that whoosh for me, it's usually anger. I think that's the go-to for a lot of men. I feel that whoosh of emotion that feels like anger. And the patience, the pause, the take a deep breath. I do not need to fight. It's like fight or flight. I do not need to react. I do not need to say anything. I'm going to take some time to work on myself. And part of the next step is, okay, my wife just said something that made me angry. It would be very easy for me to say, what's wrong with her? She needs to change the way she talks to me, blah, blah, blah. But if I pause and I use patience and I breathe, let's say I go take a walk for 5 minutes, what I'm thinking about is, it's like 10% my wife and 90% my own stuff.
Right.
This is because, my mom yelled at me like that when I was a kid, and now I have a lot of triggers around that. And so I'm breathing and I'm empowering myself in the process. I'm not going to let my wife have that much control over my emotions. That's part of it too. And so I'm going to go back and face the situation with a more realistic perspective. Patient before I come back. And so I'm going to say, I can express it at that point in a calm way if I want. Hey, that was really hurtful when you said that in this way. That doesn't work for me because of my stuff. But let's get back to the point of what were you trying to say? But anyway, the patience of not reacting. Same thing with my kids. If they're hitting each other or something, I've snapped at them in anger, like, stop, whatever. And to work on that pause, patience.
Yes.
If this is a teaching moment, I mean, if someone's unsafe, I can stop the situation as best I can. But then let's slow down. I'm not going to come from a place of reactivity, of fight or flight. I want to come from a place of I forgot how you said it. It was really beautiful. Like this loving, caring place, this more authentic from my heart. It's heartfelt. That's how I want to be with the people who are closest to me in my life, the people who I want. And to not lose focus, the priority is the relationship. The priority is not whether we get to the thing on time or whatever I'm stressed about. The priority is, am I maintaining that relationship with my wife and my kids and the people who are important to me?
Thank you. What
Yeah,
this entire discussion with you brings to my mind is we have the power, right?
totally.
We have the power to cultivate the relationship that we really want to cultivate. And that is more than a romantic relationship. It's all relationships with our children, with our family, with our friends, with our spouse, with any significant other. We have that power. And when we realize that it starts with us, it starts with making sure that we develop the autonomy outside of these relationships, that we are assertive enough to have our own voice, and we're confident enough to know who we are and why we feel the way that we feel. And when we get to that place, then we truly have that power to cultivate and create the relationships that we really desire.
Absolutely. 100%. I love that.
Love it. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Again, it was such a pleasure. Can you tell
Yeah.
the good listeners how to find you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to couplestherapistcouch.com. That's
Mm-hmm.
mostly a lot of resources for therapists. But
Okay.
if you want to look at my practice website, it's just shanebirkel.com. But you can find my email address there. Anybody's free to reach out if they have any questions or anything.
And your podcast, where can they find
Yeah,
your
you'll find
podcast?
the podcast. You'll find the podcast at couplestherapistcouch.com. There's links to it, but you can also find it if you search for that on iTunes or
Mm-hmm.
Stitcher or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find it there.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Beautiful. Such a
yeah,
pleasure.
yeah.
So thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much, Chate. This has been awesome. I really appreciate this
Yay.
work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. This has
Um,
been great.
I truly enjoyed it. Great discussion. It's going to help so many individuals. So to close, I am Shate Thompson, the founder of Brand New Me and your host. Stay connected if you are not in the Facebook community, Brand New Me Journey. And if you have not grabbed your copy of my best-selling book, Brand New Me, Complemented, Completed, and Whole. It is a workbook and it helps you to do that work. It's for couples and it's for singles, for you to grow from within. And I have some workshops coming up. I'm going to travel, so I'm coming to a city near you for us to dive in and start doing the work and having great discussion around relationships. And poetry. If you're into poetry, then poetry is going to be involved as well. I look forward to connecting with each and every one of you very, very soon, and continue being your authentic self. Take care.